Hello, welcome back to the Under the Hat podcast. Today, we're going to be doing some philosophy. Now, I know what you're thinking. Philosophy? I came here for food, and food stories, and food-related things. Why am I listening to somebody philosophize? And the answer is, well, this is food philosophy. This is not me. This is thousands of years of humans coming together to determine what the best way to eat something is. And so, today we're talking about the lessons that you can get from barbecue. So, barbecue. We talked about it last time. What actually is it? Well, it's a couple different things. A lot of people do it. In America, you may think of brisket or baby back ribs or barbecue chicken. It's very, very good. It tends to be meat with a side of typically, green beans, mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, biscuits and gravy, collard greens. You can do crab cakes as a side with barbecue. I've seen that. It's a bit unorthodox, but it's good. And it originated in the American Deep South as, well, a necessity. And here's what I mean by necessity. So they needed to preserve their meats. And the most common way to do this was salt. So salt was very valuable because you could have food for longer. If you had food for longer, you'd survive for longer. It's a big thing. And the Romans would actually pay their soldiers in salt so that they could preserve meat, so that they could live longer, so their families could live longer. So if you ever heard the phrase, earn your salt, that would be where that comes from. But salt's hard to come by, especially if you're in a new world. And indeed, the colonists were when they discovered South America. So they needed a way to preserve meats. And the Aztecs and the Incas did this, and the Spanish found out, and they showed it to the British, and the British showed it to the French and everybody. And the point is, they created this system, the Aztecs and the Incas, and a variety of the South American indigenous peoples, had something called a barbacoa. Now what that is a series of wood slats that you would place over a low-burning fire, and you would smoke your meat to preserve it. It would dry it out, it would make it like, early jerky, and you would be able to have meat for a lot longer than you typically have it because of how well it was preserved. Now, how this developed over time was that, they would give it to the slave population because it was a very tough, very sort of not, honestly not delicious variety of meat in its early time, but it was very cost effective. And then when the slaves were freed, barbecue developed as sort of another necessity. You see, during the time of segregation, post-war, the freed men and women weren't able to afford the same high-quality groceries as the average white American. They had to settle for the shittier cuts of meat. They couldn't afford the good ones, so they had to make the bad ones taste good. So they would buy tougher cuts of meat, like ribs, brisket's pretty nice, but the worst cuts, and they would transform it using this slow barbacoa method. See, this is the biggest takeaway from barbecue that I think is important for everyone to know, is that barbecue can't be done right and be done quickly at the same time. It just doesn't happen, I forget who said this, but doing a job right is more important than doing it at all. And I think that's very true. And I think it's especially true with barbecue. Because, I've had very, very good barbecue that takes forever to make. And I've had very, very bad barbecue that happens pretty quickly. You can take an average piece of white meat chicken, put it on a plate, and put some Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce on it. And that'll be, just okay. Nothing special. There are nutrients in that. But when you take a piece of brisket and you wrap it and you give it a deep salt and spice rub, and you lather it up in barbecue sauce, you wrap it in newspaper or another thin line paper, parchment paper, you put that in a smoker for 7 to 8 hours, it transforms. It's something divine. It breaks down the cellulose and the fat in between the individual fibers of the meat, which gives it this amazing juicy quality that just, the phrase melts in your mouth is really where that comes from. And when you have a set of ribs where it's just the meat falls right off the bone, it's because of how slowly they were able to melt the fat. They didn't burn it. I mean, the outside is going to be burnt. That's what it is with brisket, but that's why you take it in these long, thin slices. But they didn't burn the inner fat. They just let it seep into the meat and give that an amazing, smoky flavor. And then you combine this with all these classic spices, like, you pepper and salt and ground cumin and allspice, and you really do have to take your time with it. But once you do, the rewards are just plain and simple worth it. I mean, it's delightful. Brisket is one of the most intensely satisfying meals that mankind can eat. So, the lesson number 1 of barbecue. Can't do it right and do it quickly at the same time. Lesson number 2. If you have to do a difficult task, it's better to do it with friends. Now, one of these particular niches of barbecue is called pit beef. And that may not sound appetizing, but I assure you, it is. Now, what this involves is quite literally digging a pit to build a fire low and slow and to smoke your meat that way on this pit of a fire you've created. And there is this wonderful Deep South tradition of just getting everyone in the neighborhood together, digging a pit, and just doing barbecue. And it takes all day or all afternoon or all night, but you just stand there with your buddies, just drinking beer and talking, or you just sit there, occasionally poking at the meat, but you don't touch it. I mean, once you put it on there, there's very little maintenance that you actually have to do. You got to watch the temperature to be sure, keep an eye on it, but it's not super active. So what happens there? Now, this is a very old, very, very old American tradition, and it's also a very, very old human tradition. I mean, the first families that formed were the ones that formed around the campfire, making food and giving that to each other. Because in early civilization, just thinking about this anthropologically, in early civilization, what happened? You were a hunter, or you were a gatherer, or you were a child. And when you're a child, you get taken care of. And traditionally, if you're a girl, you would typically either gather or weave or tend to the home. And if you were a guy, you would go out and hunt. That's what happened. That's the way it was. So the hunters would get up very, very early. They would eat a limited breakfast, just something to get them energy. They'd go out, they'd kill something, they'd bring it back, they'd dress it, they'd cook it, they'd eat it as a family. Now, let's just think of this defensively. Would you rather have individual isolated meals where you have to procure everything yourself, or you can specialize, the economic term for specialization, you can specialize and everyone does the task that they are best suited to or are best at, and everyone profits because they share the rewards of that. A wife could make better running shoes while her husband is out hunting wild boar to bring them bacon. And because if she specialized in making shoes, and because he specialized in hunting, so economically, the breakdown is you can hunt more if you have better shoes, you can make better shoes if you have more food, and you get more food if you can hunt more. So the family comes together and they specialize and they share a meal together. They cook it together. You're not going to see the hunters for most of the day. The hunters aren't going to see the weavers and the gatherers for most of the day until they come back, until they rest, until they eat something, together. And that's an old tradition. And we should do that more. And we don't, sadly enough, as a race, as a humanity, we don't eat enough together. But I wish we did. Because I feel like so many great stories are shared over a meal, over a fire. And if you've ever attended one of these pit beef journeys, you will hear some pretty crazy stories. People feel safe when they eat. And when they feel safe, excuse me, I'm a little ill right now, but when they feel safe, and when they feel that they can open up to you, that's when you experience some of the best parts that humanity has to offer. That's when you hear the love stories. That's when you hear, the sad stories. When people feel safe. They feel like you're going to judge them fairly. They feel like they can be honest. It's over food. It's such a big facilitator of that. So the second lesson of barbecue is do more things together. Eat together. That's very important. That's part of the entire journey of being a person, is hearing more stories and talking to more people and experiencing more of what life has to offer. Language is an amazing, amazing system because it allows us to take in information. So much more information than we could ever take in our own experiences. That's pretty fantastic. Like every time you read a book, every time you watch a movie, every time you talk to someone, you get their perspective. And we can't always do that. We can't be in two places at once, but language allows us to do that. And we're only going to talk if we feel comfortable, and food is a great place for you to feel comfortable. Just take your friends out to dinner. Take your mom out to dinner. She's probably been working hard to feed you, to clothe you, to get you to school. Buy your mom dinner. I feel like that's pretty, you owe it to her. So the third lesson of barbecue is, I would honestly say, be creative. Because if you think about it, barbecue was not always the coveted, delicious, amazing thing that it was today. No, it came out of necessity. And if you look at the French Revolution food as well, which also came out of necessity, because I don't know if many people know this, but the French Revolution was actually a pretty dangerous time to be alive, especially in France. So what they did was the peasants and the average Joe couldn't always have access to their food. Land was under contest, the fiefdoms and the serfdoms were being dismantled. You couldn't really have access to everything that you would typically have access to. So they engineered entirely new ways of cooking old recipes. And what that did was open up an entire range of flavors and beauty and simplicity. Bread is fairly simple. It's wheat, it's yeast, it's water. Maybe eggs. Maybe add some sugar and you've got a cake. But, bread on its own can be a pretty damn good thing. Like, if you get butter and salt and bread, and if it's good bread and you have good friends and you split that, oh man, that is a meal. I mean, that's satisfying. I would, in high school, I would basically go with my friends to a local bakery at lunch. We'd drive out, we'd pick up a loaf of bread, and we would just eat it in the car. Just an entire loaf of bread. Yeah, it wasn't great for us. It is just carbs. But that experience was delightful. And I had a great friggin' time with it. Because you can't always, you can't always afford a big meal. But there's beauty in the simplicity there. And that's where barbecue comes from too. Beauty in the simplicity. It is just meat and smoke. I mean, you can skew it to be fancier. Don't get me wrong. You add new flavors and put in black truffle or whatever. You can make anything fancier. But fundamentally, it's pretty simple. But they just got creative with it. They found out what flavors worked and what didn't. And that takes a lot of trial and error because the process is slow. But they did it anyway. So barbecue teaches us 3 things. And these are very important. You can't do things right and do things quickly at the same time. Don't even try. Just do it right. And if you don't get it right the first time, try again. Don't give up. Just don't rush it. Nothing good happens with rushing. Any wife will tell you that. And remember, the second lesson is do more things together. Experiment together. Try new foods together. Make barbecue together. And the third lesson is be creative. Things may be simple. You may seem like you don't have a lot of room to sort of branch out and explore and try new things with your food, but hell, come on, play with your food. See what you can do with this. Throw some new stuff in. Have crab cakes with your barbecue. Have a peanut butter and tuna sandwich. That one probably won't be great, but try it anyway. Somebody has to. You never really know what's going to work out. So just do it. Be the guy who makes something amazing and makes something new. So these are just some of the lessons that you get from barbecue. So I would recommend that you go and you go out and you get yourself a nice half rack of ribs and you eat that in your car, get like 20 napkins, and you think, man, life ain't so bad. Or better yet, get a full rack of ribs for you and each one of your friends, get 140 napkins, and eat it and tell stories about it. Tell them you love them. And then you go buy your mother dinner. So, yeah. All right. Be good.